The Mongol Empire, a vast and rising power under Genghis Khan, had long relied on trade to fuel its expansion. But when a Mongol caravan carrying valuable goods and life-giving supplies was ambushed and slaughtered in the heart of the Khwarezmian Empire, Genghis Khan's resolve was tested. His merchants, traders and families had been killed, and precious goods stolen, an unforgivable affront to the Mongol people. Determined to seek justice, Genghis Khan sent his trusted chief envoy to the Shah of the Khwarezmian Empire. The envoy was tasked with demanding justice, compensation for the loss of lives and goods, and assurance that the Shah would make amends for his terrible crime. But instead of negotiating peace, the Shah ordered the envoy's death. The chief's envoy's severed head was sent back to the Mongols, a fatal mistake that would spark a wave of wrath unlike any the world had ever seen. Genghis Khan stated, "I'm the flail of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." The punishment would be nothing like the world had ever seen before. So we ask ourselves, what was the price of disrespecting the Mongols? It's a question that has puzzled historians and experts alike. Today, we'll try to solve it. Let's dive into it. To understand why Genghis Khan turned his gaze to the west, we must first look at the context. The Mongols had long been expanding eastward, conquering vast territories. Trade was the lifeblood of their growing empire. The Silk Road, a crucial network of trade routes, ran through the heart of Central Asia, and the Mongols had a deep interest in maintaining peace along these routes to ensure the flow of goods, wealth and information. It was in this context that a Mongol caravan carrying vital goods was sent from the east to the Khwarezmian Empire. This caravan, led by the Mongols, traveled with immense trust that their goods would reach the empire unarmed. But upon arrival in the Khwarezmian-controlled city of Otrar, the caravan was attacked. The goods were seized and the merchants and accompanying travelers were slaughtered. The Khwarezmian officials claimed it was a case of banditry, but it was no mistake. The Mongols had been betrayed. This was more than an economic setback for the Mongols. It was an affront of their dignity. The Mongols, who revered the sacred bond of trade and honor, could not allow such an act to go unpunished. It was then that Genghis Khan decided to send an emissary to the Shah, demanding the return of the stolen goods and compensation for the lives lost. The message was clear. The Mongols would not tolerate such disrespect. But the Shah, in his arrogance and misunderstanding of Mongol resolve, saw this as an opportunity to flex his own power. He executed the chief envoy. Instead of showing humility, he severed the envoy's head and sent it back to Genghis Khan as a symbol of defiance. The Shah's choice was one of the greatest miscalculations of his reign. The murder of the envoy was a declaration of war, and Genghis Khan would not be swayed by diplomacy or compromise. He was no longer dealing with a mere trade dispute. This was personal. The Mongols, now enraged, would embark on a campaign that would reshape the course of history. Genghis Khan invaded the empire with 100,000 to 150,000 troops. They would unleash a devastation not ever seen before. To fully understand the scale of the Mongol response, we must first explore their approach to war. The Mongols were not like any army the world had seen before. They were disciplined, highly organized and ruthless fighting force. What set them apart was their strategic brilliance and the way they transformed warfare into an all-consuming effort. Genghis Khan's approach to war was not about simply defeating an enemy, it was about total annihilation. His military tactics were centered around using speed, surprise and overwhelming force. The Mongol army, famously mounted on horseback, could travel vast distances quickly. They were relentless in their pursuit, often engaging in psychological warfare to terrify their enemies before the battle even began. The Mongols were also masters of intelligence. Spies were a critical part of the strategy. They had an extensive network of informants who provided information about enemy positions, weaknesses and internal conflicts. This allowed them to plan their assaults with precision. The Mongols knew how to strike fast, how to disappear into the landscape and how to reappear when least expected. But it wasn't just about tactics. The Mongols had a deep understanding of human psychology. When they attacked, they didn't just come for the cities, they came for the people's hearts and minds. Genghis Khan understood the power of terror. His army often spread fear far and wide, using mass executions, gruesome displays of their power, and the sheer brutality of their raids to demoralize their enemies before they even faced battle. This total war strategy would serve the Mongols well, as they turned their focus on the Khwarezmian Empire. It was no longer just about retaliation, it was about sending a message. The Shah had disrespected the Mongols, and now Genghis Khan would show him the full cost of what that disrespect was. The Mongols' wrath was swift, devastating, and left an unforgettable mark on every city that dared to resist their might. Bukhara, Samarkand, Nishapur and Herat, these cities, once bustling centers of culture and commerce, would soon be remembered, not for their former glory, but for the destruction at their hand of the Mongols. After the assassination of his envoy, Genghis Khan wasn't interested in negotiating with the Shah anymore. The time for diplomacy had passed. The only thing left was to send a brutal message. Genghis Khan had one objective: obliterate the Khwarezmian Empire from the map and erase every trace of it. His strategy was a mix of psychological warfare and military precision, and it worked with horrifying effectiveness. Bukhara was the first target. After the city's defenders resisted the Mongol siege, they realized that they were no match for the Mongols' superior tactics. Genghis Khan, once confident that Bukhara would surrender, had his armies surround the city, cutting off all supplies and communication. The city's leadership tried to negotiate terms, but once the Mongols breached the walls, their fate was sealed. The Mongols swept through the city, killing civilians, soldiers, and anyone caught in their path. What happened next was particularly cruel. The Mongols did not just stop at the battlefield, they systematically destroyed everything in their path. The city's architectural treasures, its cultural institutions, and even its farmlands were razed. The once thriving marketplaces were turned into ash, and the majestic mosques and schools that had been beacons of learning were obliterated. Not even the irrigation systems were spared. The Mongols destroyed the agricultural infrastructure that had supported the region for centuries. After the fall of Bukhara, Samarkand, the jewel of the region, was the next target. A city known for its splendor and wealth, Samarkand had long been a crossroads of civilizations, blending Persian, Turkic and Islamic cultures. The city put up a stiff defense, but like Bukhara, it couldn't stand up to the Mongols' military might. Once again, the Mongols used psychological warfare to break the spirit of the defenders. The Mongols showed no mercy, killing civilians and soldiers alike, tearing down the walls and leaving the city in ruin. But what set Samarkand apart was the intense symbolism it held. For centuries, it had been a hub for cultural exchange and education. To see such a city reduced to rubble was a grim reminder of the Mongol commitment to not only conquer, but to erase all traces of their enemy's identity. No stone was left unturned. Buildings, statues, libraries, and schools were leveled. They took it a step further, systematically destroying the city's infrastructure, ensuring it would never rise again. This obliteration wasn't just about defeating an enemy, it was about eliminating the possibility of any resistance from the Khwarezmian remnants. The Mongols didn't stop with Bukhara and Samarkand. The cities of Herat and Nishapur were subjected to similar fates. The Mongols took no prisoners. In Herat, it's said that the Mongols killed so many people that their bodies formed mounds, which could be seen from miles away. In Nishapur, the Mongols captured the city after a lengthy siege and then slaughtered their inhabitants. Women and children were no exceptions. They were all killed, and the city was burned to the ground. What's most shocking about the Mongol campaign was the totality of the destruction. Genghis Khan's army didn't just destroy the cities militarily, they eradicated the cultural, social and economic pillars that had sustained them. This wasn't just conquest, it was cultural annihilation. The Mongols didn't stop at killing the soldiers. They hunted down scholars, merchants, and anyone who could carry Khwarezmian culture forward. The libraries and places of worship were burned, priceless manuscripts destroyed, and any survivors were enslaved or executed. It was as though the Khwarezmian Empire never existed. After the fall of Bukhara and Samarkand, Genghis Khan's fury was far from quenched. He was now on a singular mission to hunt down the Shah himself and destroy everything he represented. The Shah's execution of the Mongol envoy was seen as a personal betrayal to Genghis Khan, and the Khan would not rest until every trace of the Shah's reign was extinguished. The hunt for the Shah was a relentless pursuit, one that would span mountains, deserts, and vast stretches of the Khwarezmian Empire. The Shah, realizing the threat Genghis Khan posed, fled westward, seeking refuge in the fortified cities of his empire. His first stop was Nishapur, a large and well-defended city that he hoped would offer sanctuary. However, the Mongols were never far behind. Genghis Khan sent his most trusted generals, Subutai and Jebe, to hunt the Shah down. These two men were seasoned warriors, known for their expertise in trekking and their unwavering loyalty to the Khan. They were relentless in their pursuit, chasing the Shah across the entire region. The Mongols didn't just march towards their goal, they used intelligence and strategy to stay a step ahead of their target. They surrounded cities, cut off escape routes, and set traps for the Shah. It wasn't long before the Shah realized he couldn't escape the Mongols' wrath. But the Shah's flight only prolonged the inevitable. As he tried to flee further into the west, he began to face mounting challenges. The Mongols were no strangers to tough terrain, and they had no intention of stopping. They pursued the Shah all the way to the Caucasus mountains, where the Shah sought refuge in the fortress of Gorgan. But even in this seemingly impregnable fortress, the Mongols were undeterred. They laid siege to the fortress, cutting off supplies and ensuring that the Shah had no place to run. By this time, the Shah had already lost much of his empire and his power. His soldiers had deserted him and his supporters were few. Genghis Khan's relentless pursuit, combined with the internal strife within the Khwarezmian Empire, made it impossible for the Shah to mount a resistance. As the Mongols closed in, the Shah was forced to flee again, this time seeking refuge on an island in the Caspian Sea, where he died in exile. Though the Shah escaped the Mongols' grasp for a time, he could not outrun his destiny. His death was symbolic of the Mongols' message: disrespect them and there will be no refuge, no place to hide. The Mongols had not only wiped out the cities and fields of the Khwarezmian Empire, but had also pursued the Shah with single-minded intensity, ensuring that every trace of the Khwarezmian Empire was wiped from history. The Mongol invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire wasn't just a military campaign, it was a ruthless eradication of a civilization. The brutality of Genghis Khan and his generals was calculated and systematic, a hallmark of Mongol warfare that left no room for mercy. From the moment the first Mongol arrow struck, the violence unleashed upon the Khwarezmians was unimaginable. Genghis Khan's decision to wipe out the Khwarezmian Empire wasn't just about revenge for the massacre of his caravan and his emissaries, it was about sending a message. The Mongols practiced what we now call total war, where the entire populations were obliterated and cities turned to ash. Cities like Bukhara, Samarkand and Nishapur were leveled, their once thriving populations slaughtered or enslaved. Thousands of civilians, men, women and children, even the livestock, were killed indiscriminately. The Mongols did not distinguish between soldier and civilian. Anyone and everyone who stood in their way was fair game. In the most notorious example of Mongol brutality, the city of Merv was destroyed in 1221, with reports suggesting that 1.3 million people were killed in a single massacre. The city was so thoroughly obliterated that its ruins were used as a warning to other cities. Do not resist the Mongols, or suffer the same fate. This is why the Mongol campaign against the Khwarezmian Empire has become synonymous with savagery. It was more than just a war, it was a systematic destruction of a civilization. Genghis Khan did not stop until he knew that the very name Khwarezmian would no longer exist. Cities, fields and entire regions were erased from history, and no legacy would remain. The destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire didn't just reshape the region in the short term, it had long-lasting consequences that rippled through the centuries. The region's cultural and political landscape was completely transformed. Where once stood prosperous cities, now only ruins remained. The loss of life, culture and knowledge was staggering. The destruction wasn't just a physical one, it was cultural and psychological. The Khwarezmian Empire had been a major center of Persian and Islamic culture, with vibrant cities like Bukhara, Samarkand and Herat being intellectual powerhouses. These cities were known for their learning, art and trade, and were home to scholars, philosophers and scientists. The Mongol onslaught shattered this cultural cradle, disrupting trade routes, demolishing libraries, and erasing centuries of scientific and artistic advancement. However, the Mongol impact didn't end with the obliteration of the Khwarezmians. It was the death of Jalal ad-Din Mingburnu, the last hope for the Khwarezmian survival, that truly marked the end of the Khwarezmian dynasty, and the complete extinguishing of the empire's legacy. Jalal ad-Din had made attempts to resist the Mongols, but after his defeat at the Battle of the Indus and his eventual death in 1231, the final remnants of the Khwarezmian resistance vanished. Without their last leader, the Khwarezmians had no power to fight back, and the region was fully absorbed into the Mongol Empire. The legacy of the Khwarezmian dynasty became nothing more than a memory. The Mongols not only erased the physical remnants of the empire, but also severed its dynastic ties, ensuring that no successor could rise to challenge Mongol rule. By the time the last Khwarezmian resistance was suppressed, the region's fate had been sealed. The Mongols' impact on the region was profound, as they restructured the political and economic systems. The terror that Genghis Khan unleashed became a fundamental part of how the region viewed power, strength and survival for generations to come. In the aftermath, the once prosperous Khwarezmian region lay in ruin, and the scars left by the Mongols were deep and lasting. It would take centuries for the area to recover, and even then, it would never fully regain its former glory. The price of disrespecting the Mongols was devastating. The campaigns against the Khwarezmian Empire showcased Genghis Khan's ruthless desire for retribution, his ability to utilize total war, and his complete disregard for mercy. Cities that defied him were obliterated, their inhabitants slaughtered or enslaved. Even the memory of the Khwarezmian Empire was erased. Fields burned, buildings reduced to ashes, and survivors hunted down relentlessly. Genghis Khan, in his fury, made sure that the legacy of those who defied him would be wiped from the earth forever. By the time the last traces of the Khwarezmian Empire were erased, the Mongol Empire had reached its height. But this wasn't the end of Genghis Khan's ambitions. His eyes turned east, towards China, once more. He had already conquered the Jin dynasty's northern territories, but the final push to bring China under Mongol rule was a campaign unlike any other. A campaign that would stretch Genghis Khan's legacy even further. In the next video, we'll explore the final years of Genghis Khan's reign and the ongoing brutal conquest of China. Join us as we follow Genghis Khan's unyielding pursuit of domination in the East. Until then, I'm the Chronicler, reminding you to like, subscribe and remember, history is written in mystery.